Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I'm very happy to take a call on this bill. And specifically, I want to talk to Clause 16 of this bill and address some of the rhetoric that we've heard in this House over the last couple of days. The sanctimony that we've been hearing about it's okay to sell assets because someone else has done it before. I don't even want to get started about where this logic could take us. It pretty much leaves it wide open that anybody could do anything because everything's been done before. But what we're having is the sanctimony from members opposite that somehow what they're doing is offering protection that our assets won't be told. But the bit that I love the most, the kernel I love the most in the sanctimony we've had flowing from the other side is it's okay for us to sell them because we told people first. Somehow it's okay. We went out and told people, well, you know what? Going out and telling someone you're going to do them over and then doing it doesn't make it any better. Selling assets is wrong, always has been, always will be, and it doesn't matter what you tell them. So I have no amnesia, Queen Margaret. I'll tell you about growing up on the streets of Sydenham in the 1980s and the fact that asset sales are very much part of my political whakapapa. Let's have a look at the protections, the so-called protections that have been put in place under Clause 16. What we have is a government that is running scared. What it said is that we're going to protect these assets because we're going to retain 51% ownership of them. And that what has happened is that putting these protections around them, but let's actually think about the technicalities of these protections. It's 51% of voting shares. This offers no protection against asset stripping. What will still be allowed is the fact that the assets of the companies can be sold. And if members opposite want to traverse history of asset sales in this country, I'm more than happy to oblige and have a discussion about what they did in the 1990s and have a look at what asset stripping did to some of this nation's assets and the shame that members opposite should feel and hardly sit there with the sanctimony and the crowing that we are hearing. So let's have a look at this such lauded Clause 16 that is put in there about the restriction on the reduction of the Crown's holdings. That we don't want to sell them. That's what we're doing here. But what we have is a clause that prohibits a shareholding minister from disposing of shares in a minister's name or permitting the issue or allotment of shares or securities in a mixed ownership model company if doing so would result in the Crown owning less than 51%. But, ladies and gentlemen, this does nothing to protect the very assets that those companies hold. Once a mixed ownership model company has had its shares held to private investors, the assets of that company are very much at risk. The pressure can be put on the company to sell the assets to meet the obligation to return a profit. The assets that these companies own are not guaranteed from being flogged off. It is disingenuous of members opposite to sit here and say that New Zealanders are going to retain a majority shareholding in these companies because it is simply not true. The dams can be sold. The assets of all of our power companies that are being put on the block by members opposite are very much at risk because the bill that this government has brought to this House offers absolutely no protections against asset stripping. And we know bitterly from history that members opposite belong to a party that will do nothing to protect against asset stripping. They've shown it once and they'll show it again. Now, when Treasury officials came to Select Committee to talk about this, they confirmed to members of that Select Committee that there was no mechanism in this bill to prevent asset stripping. Like Likewise, when Solid Energy, one of the Mr. Chair, one of the companies on the block, they confirmed that under this legislation before the House, privatisation would allow them to sell subsidiaries under partial privatisation. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment that addresses this. I have an amendment that provides that companies cannot sell off individual assets like dams and wind farms to private companies in order to asset strip or defeat the purpose of the 51% ownership clause. Instead, a mixed ownership model company would be required to publicly notify that they intend to sell an asset and then must wait for the sale to be approved by the Governor-General by an order in Council. If members opposite really don't want to make a raid on the assets of this country, they will vote in favour of this amendment. There is no reason not to. Not unless they are lining up to absolutely wholesale flog off the assets. Okay, Mr. Brownlee, I will say something new. I'm going to talk about Transrail. I'm going to talk about Transrail and Back to the Future. I'm going to take a look at the shameless asset stripping that happened when National were last in government. In 1993, when the Bolger government sold far too cheaply Transrail to a consortium of Wisconsin Central Railroad, Berkshire and Fay Richwhite. This was privatised. I am talking about the bill. I'm talking about an amendment that will prevent this from happening again. And if you don't want to flog off the assets, you should vote for it, Mr. Brownlee.
Order.
Now, they should vote for it, Mr. Chairman. So what happened? The assets of Transrail were sold off because there was no mechanism to prevent this. Just as there is no mechanism in this present bill to prevent the sale of assets belonging to the 51% owned companies. There is no mechanism in here that has been confirmed by Treasury officials at Select Committee that that mechanism is not present in the bill, and the amendment that I am bringing would put such a mechanism in place and would protect the very assets that have been built up by generations of New Zealanders, the dams that New Zealanders have toiled away and did not build for members opposite to flog off to the lowest bidder. The reason why the pressure will be put on these companies to sell these assets is to return a profit. Because these are companies that are now going to be covered off by the Companies Act and not the State-Owned Enterprises Act, and they are compelled to operate with one purpose, and that is return a profit to shareholder. So there needs to be these mechanisms to protect against that in this bill, and that is what this amendment is giving. What this bill is doing is it is nothing short of looting. It is a raid on the assets of hard-working New Zealanders that have built these up over generations. We've seen what this members opposite and the party opposite do in the dark days of asset sales. We've seen that the state that Transrail was in. We've seen what had to be the investment that needed to be put in to build it back out, because there is nothing that they will do to stop the asset stripping that will do there. The profits of Transrail dropped dramatically from 1999 to 2000. And what had to happen when the Clark Labor government came to bring it back is there had to be a huge infrastructural investment, because there was no ability for Transrail to invest in that company. So if members opposite really do believe in a 51% stake for New Zealanders, if members opposite really do believe that, and it's more than empty rhetoric, and they're not just planning an ideological raid on our assets, they will vote for this amendment. They will put in place the mechanism that will stop the asset stripping. They will put in place the mechanism that will allow New Zealanders to, at the very least, retain a 51% shareholding. You shouldn't be selling them at all, but if you are going to sell them, then you should, at the very least, protect against that.
I put that the question be now put.
Brendan Horan.